Naomi's hands trembled as she counted the crumpled bills for the third time, her eyes darting to the growing line behind the elderly woman at register 4. $12. That was all she had left until Friday, and it needed to last her and her father through 4 more days of groceries and his blood pressure medication. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside. You're holding up the line." The cashier's voice cut sharp through the fluorescent hum of the supermarket, and Naomi looked up from her mop bucket to see an elderly woman frozen at the checkout, her wrinkled hands digging frantically through a worn leather handbag. "Please, I know it's here somewhere. I just had it this morning." The woman's voice cracked, and Naomi felt something twist in her chest. "Lady, some of us have places to be." A man in a business suit huffed loudly, checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. "Probably trying to scam the store," a woman muttered just loud enough to be heard, and a ripple of laughter moved through the line like poison spreading through water. The elderly woman's cheeks flushed crimson. She pulled out crumpled tissues, a small mirror, a set of keys, anything but the wallet she desperately needed. Her hands shook harder now, and Naomi watched her lips move silently, as if she were praying for the ground to swallow her whole. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to leave the items and step away from the register." The cashier's tone had gone cold, mechanical, the kind of voice that had learned to stop caring about the people in front of it. "I don't understand," the woman whispered. "I've never forgotten my wallet before. Please, just give me 1 moment." "We don't have a moment. There are people waiting." The store manager appeared now, arms crossed, his badge catching the light as he stepped between the woman and the register like she was a criminal caught in the act. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll call security." "Security? For a loaf of bread and some milk?" The woman's voice broke completely now, tears welling in her eyes as she looked around at the crowd of strangers staring at her, judging her, none of them offering a single hand of help. Naomi's mop clattered against the tile floor before she even realized she'd let go of it. She was moving before her mind caught up with her body, weaving between the judgmental stares and folded arms, until she stood directly beside the trembling woman. Every eye in the checkout line turned toward her now, the janitor in her faded blue uniform, and she felt her pulse hammering in her throat. "How much does she owe?" Naomi asked, pulling the crumpled bills from her apron pocket before the cashier could even answer. "Excuse me?" The cashier blinked at her, confused. "I asked how much she owes. I'll pay it." Naomi's voice surprised even herself with how steady it sounded, though her heart was slamming against her ribs. "Sweetheart, you can't afford," the store manager started, but Naomi cut him off, something fierce rising in her chest that she didn't fully understand. "That's not your business. Just tell me the total." She held out every dollar she had, watching the cashier's face shift from confusion to something like embarrassment as she rang up the items and took the crumpled bills from Naomi's outstretched hand. The elderly woman turned to Naomi, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Tears streamed freely down the woman's weathered cheeks now, and she reached out, grasping Naomi's hand with a grip far stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Her voice trembled with disbelief, her eyes searching Naomi's face like she was trying to memorize every detail. "Because nobody should be humiliated over bread," Naomi said simply, squeezing the woman's hand back. "Everyone deserves a little dignity." The woman's grip tightened, and she leaned closer, her eyes locking onto Naomi's with an intensity that made the noise of the supermarket fade into the background. "I will never forget this. Do you hear me? Never. One day, I promise you, I will repay this kindness 1,000 times over." Naomi smiled softly and shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just get home safe." If this story is already pulling at your heart, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will completely change how you see this moment. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and give this video a like if you believe kindness should never go unnoticed. The elderly woman released Naomi's hand slowly, wiping her tears with a shaking finger, and gathered her small bag of groceries. She paused at the exit, turning back one final time to look at Naomi, who had already picked her mop back up and returned to scrubbing a spill near the produce section. acting as though nothing extraordinary had just happened. Naomi had no idea that the woman standing in that doorway was not simply a forgetful elderly customer who had misplaced her wallet. She had no idea that within 24 hours, her entire life would be turned completely upside down. She had no idea that the woman she just helped was about to walk into a boardroom on the 40th floor of the tallest building in the city, where dozens of executives would rise from their seats the moment she entered the room. Naomi simply believed she would never see the woman again. She was wrong, because less than an hour later, as Naomi finished her shift and clocked out, exhausted and satisfied despite her empty pockets, the store manager was already dialing corporate headquarters to report what he called a serious violation of company policy. And across town, in a glass office overlooking the entire city skyline, an assistant burst through double doors without knocking, breathless, holding a phone against her chest. "Ms. Park," she said, her voice shaking with urgency. "You need to see this. Security footage from the supermarket just came in, and I think you're going to want to know who that janitor is." The woman in the tailored gray suit standing at the window turned slowly, her eyes narrowing with an intensity that made the assistant take an involuntary step backward. Evelyn Park set down her coffee cup, her expression darkening. "Find her," she said quietly. "Find her name, her address, everything. I want to know who she is by morning." Because Evelyn Park was not simply a woman who had forgotten her wallet at a grocery store checkout counter. Naomi trudged home that evening with aching feet and an empty stomach, but somehow her chest still felt lighter than it had in months. She climbed the narrow staircase to their small apartment, the smell of her father's cough medicine drifting from beneath the door, and forced a smile before she pushed it open. "You're late," her father, Joseph, said from his worn armchair, setting down the newspaper he'd been squinting at for the past hour. "Did something happen at work?" "Nothing happened, Papa. Just a busy day." Naomi kissed his forehead and moved to the kitchen, opening the nearly empty fridge and trying to figure out what she could possibly make from almost nothing. "Naomi." His voice was firm now, the tone he used when he knew she was lying to protect him. "Tell me the truth." She sighed, leaning against the counter, and finally told him everything: the wallet, the humiliation, the crowd of strangers who did nothing but mock, and the way she couldn't stop herself from stepping forward with her last $12. Joseph's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand. "That's my daughter, always giving when she has nothing left to give. We needed that money, Papa. I don't know what we're going to eat until Friday. We'll figure it out. We always do." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm proud of you. Never forget that." Naomi barely slept that night, her mind spinning with worry, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited her at work the next morning. "Naomi Mensah." The store manager's voice boomed across the break room the moment she walked through the employee entrance, and every coworker in the room turned to stare. "Yes, sir?" Her stomach dropped at the coldness in his tone. "My office. Now." She followed him down the narrow hallway, her heart pounding, and the moment the door clicked shut behind them, he turned on her with barely contained fury. "Do you understand what you did yesterday? You violated 3 separate company policies. You interfered with a transaction, you engaged with a customer outside your job responsibilities, and you created a scene that embarrassed this store." "I was helping someone who was being humiliated," Naomi said, her voice rising despite herself. "That woman didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal. That's not your call to make. You're a janitor, not customer service." He slammed a folder onto his desk. "Corporate has already been informed. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending investigation." Suspended? For helping someone? Naomi felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "Please, I need this job. My father depends on my income for his medication. You should have thought about that before you decided to play hero." His voice was flat, emotionless, and Naomi felt tears burning behind her eyes as he continued speaking. "I'll be honest with you. This is likely going to end in termination. I'll let corporate finalize the decision, but don't expect to keep this position." Naomi walked out of that office in a daze, collecting her belongings from her locker while her coworkers avoided her eyes, whispering behind cupped hands. By the time she stepped outside into the harsh afternoon sun, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled down her cheeks. She sat on the curb outside the supermarket, her body shaking with quiet sobs, wondering how she was going to tell her father that she'd lost the only income keeping them afloat, all because she couldn't stand by and watch an old woman be humiliated over a loaf of bread. But miles away, in a boardroom so silent you could hear the ticking of an antique clock mounted on the wall, Evelyn Park sat at the head of a long mahogany table, completely ignoring the quarterly reports her executives had spent weeks preparing. "Ms. Park, if we could discuss the expansion proposal for the Northern District," one executive began, but Evelyn raised a single hand, cutting him off instantly. "I need everyone to stop talking about business for exactly 5 minutes," she said, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the entire room immediately. She turned to her assistant, who stood near the door with a tablet clutched against her chest. "Did you find her?" "Yes, Ms. Park. Her name is Naomi Mensah. She's 26 years old, and she works as a janitor at the supermarket." The assistant hesitated before continuing. "There's more. She was suspended this morning for what the store called a policy violation. It looks like she's about to be terminated." Evelyn's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with something sharp and dangerous. "Terminated for showing basic human decency? That's what the report says, ma'am." "Unbelievable." Evelyn stood from her chair, pacing slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. Her executives exchanged confused glances, unsure why their billionaire CEO was suddenly so consumed with the fate of a supermarket janitor. "Ms. Park, if I may ask," one of the senior board members ventured cautiously, "why does this particular employee matter to you?" Evelyn turned slowly, and for the first time in years, several executives in that room saw something in her eyes they had never witnessed before: genuine emotion, raw and unguarded. "Yesterday, I forgot my wallet at a grocery store. I was humiliated in front of an entire line of strangers. Security was called. People laughed at me, mocked me, treated me like I was worthless." Her voice wavered slightly before steadying again. "And in the middle of all that cruelty, a young janitor with barely anything to her name stepped forward and used the last money she had to pay for my groceries. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for anything in return. She simply saw someone being humiliated and refused to let it continue." The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Anyone willing to give away their last dollar to protect a stranger's dignity possesses something that money cannot buy. Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. "I have spent 30 years building this company, surrounded by people who calculate every move based on personal gain. That young woman didn't calculate anything. She simply acted." She turned to her assistant, her decision already made. "Contact the supermarket. I want her reinstated immediately, and then terminate our company's entire supply contract with that store." Gasps rippled through the boardroom. "Ms. Park, that contract is worth millions. I don't care what it's worth. I will not do business with a company that punishes kindness." Evelyn's tone left no room for argument. "And after that, clear my schedule for this afternoon. I'm going to see her myself." If you're loving this story so far, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss what happens next, because Evelyn Park is about to walk into Naomi's life and change everything she's ever known. Drop a comment letting me know what you think Naomi's reaction will be, and don't forget to like this video before we continue. Naomi was still sitting on the curb outside the supermarket, wiping tears from her cheeks, when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its engine humming softly. She barely glanced up, assuming it was simply another customer arriving, until the back door opened and a familiar face stepped out onto the pavement. "Naomi Mensah?" Evelyn Park's voice was gentle now, nothing like the sharp authority she commanded in her boardroom. Naomi's eyes widened in disbelief. You're the woman from yesterday." "Yes." Evelyn walked closer, her expensive heels clicking against the concrete, and knelt slightly to meet Naomi's tear-streaked eyes. "And I believe I owe you an explanation, and a great deal more than that. I don't understand. Why are you here?" Naomi's voice trembled with confusion and exhaustion. Evelyn extended her hand, helping Naomi rise to her feet. "My name is Evelyn Park. I'm the CEO of Sterling Global Holdings. And I came here because I heard what happened to you this morning. And I refuse to let your kindness cost you everything." Naomi's mouth fell open, her mind struggling to process the words. "CEO? You're a billionaire." "I am. But yesterday, none of that mattered. Yesterday, I was simply a frightened old woman who forgot her wallet. And you were the only person willing to help me." Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I told you I would repay your kindness, and I meant every word." Naomi stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the woman before her, unable to reconcile the trembling, humiliated customer from yesterday with the powerful figure now standing in front of her, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Naomi made in a year. "I don't want anything from you," Naomi finally said, shaking her head. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected something in return." "I know that." Evelyn's voice softened even further. "That's exactly why I'm here. People who help without expecting anything are the rarest people in this world. And I refuse to let this store punish you for showing me kindness when I needed it most. They already fired me. Well, suspended me. But the manager said termination was coming." Naomi's shoulders slumped, the weight of the day crashing down on her all at once. "Not anymore." Evelyn pulled out her phone, tapping the screen briefly before turning it toward Naomi to show a message confirming that her reinstatement had already been processed. "But honestly, Naomi, I don't think you should go back there at all." "What do you mean?" "I looked into your background. You have a degree in business administration, yet you've been cleaning floors for years." Evelyn tilted her head, studying Naomi carefully. "Why is that?" Naomi's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Nobody would hire me. No connections, no experience, and my father got sick right after I graduated. I needed money immediately, and cleaning was the only job I could get on short notice. I told myself it was temporary." "How long ago was that?" 3 years. Evelyn nodded slowly, something calculating flickering behind her eyes. "Come work for me." Naomi blinked, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me? I'm offering you a position as an executive trainee at Sterling Global Holdings. Full salary, full benefits, and a genuine opportunity to build the career you were meant to have." Evelyn's tone was completely serious, no hint of joking in her expression. "This has to be some kind of mistake." Naomi took a step backward, shaking her head. "I'm a janitor. I don't belong in a corporate office. You have a business degree collecting dust. And you just proved to an entire supermarket full of strangers that you possess more integrity than half the executives currently sitting in my boardroom." Evelyn stepped closer, her voice firm but kind. "I can teach someone how to read a balance sheet. I can teach negotiation tactics and market analysis. But I cannot teach someone to have the character you showed yesterday. That is something people either have or they don't." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes again. But this time they were different, disbelief mixed with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "My father, he's sick. I can't just abandon him." "You won't have to. The salary alone will cover his medical care. And Sterling Global has excellent health benefits that extend to family members." Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it firmly into Naomi's palm. "Think about it. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come twice." That night, Naomi sat across from her father at their small kitchen table, the business card resting between them like something fragile and unbelievable. "You have to take it," Joseph said immediately, his eyes shining with pride and disbelief. "Naomi, this is everything you've worked for. What if I fail, Papa? What if I walk in there and everyone realizes I don't belong?" "You won't fail. You've never failed at anything you set your mind to." He reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with his own. "Sometimes the universe rewards kindness in ways we never expect. Don't question this gift. Just walk through the door." 2 days later, Naomi walked into the towering glass headquarters of Sterling Global Holdings, her heart hammering against her ribs as she rode the elevator toward the executive floor. The moment the doors opened, she felt dozens of eyes turn toward her, whispers rippling through the open office space. "Isn't that the janitor Ms. Park hired?" Someone murmured just loud enough for Naomi to hear. "I heard she doesn't even have real work experience." Another voice added, laced with contempt. Naomi kept her chin high, refusing to let the whispers shake her confidence, and made her way toward Evelyn's office exactly as instructed. The following weeks proved brutal. Naomi worked twice as hard as everyone around her, staying late every night to study reports and financial models she barely understood, determined to prove she deserved the opportunity she'd been given. Slowly, painfully, she began to improve, earning small nods of approval from Evelyn during meetings, though the whispers from her colleagues never fully disappeared. One executive in particular seemed determined to make her failure inevitable. Richard Cole had been with Sterling Global for over a decade, climbing the corporate ladder through calculated moves and carefully cultivated relationships. He watched with growing resentment as Evelyn began entrusting Naomi with increasingly important assignments, projects that Richard believed should have gone to someone with actual experience. "She's a janitor playing dress-up?" Richard sneered to a colleague in the break room one afternoon, unaware that Naomi stood just around the corner, close enough to hear every word. "Ms. Park has clearly lost her mind, handing real responsibility to someone who used to mop floors for a living." Naomi swallowed the hurt rising in her throat and walked away without confronting him, determined to let her work speak louder than his cruelty ever could. But Richard wasn't finished. When Evelyn assigned Naomi to lead the presentation for Sterling Global's biggest investment pitch of the year, Richard saw his opportunity to end her career before it truly began. The night before the presentation, while Naomi worked late reviewing her notes one final time, Richard quietly accessed her files and altered the financial projections, changing key numbers just enough to create massive discrepancies that would collapse under any serious scrutiny. The following morning, Naomi stood before a room full of skeptical investors, Evelyn seated prominently in the front row, watching with quiet confidence as Naomi began her presentation. "Our projected growth for the third quarter shows a 15% increase across all divisions," Naomi began, clicking to the next slide, when something made her pause. The numbers on the screen didn't match the numbers she remembered calculating just 2 nights before. Her heart began pounding as she flipped back through her notes, comparing figures rapidly while investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, murmurs of confusion spreading through the room. "I need everyone to pause for one moment," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, watching intently as Naomi continued speaking. "I've just noticed a discrepancy in these figures that doesn't align with my original calculations. I will not present false information to this room, so I'm asking for a brief recess to verify these numbers before we continue." Gasps rippled through the boardroom, and Richard, seated near the back, felt his stomach drop as every eye in the room turned toward him with growing suspicion. "Ms. Mensah, are you suggesting these figures were deliberately altered?" one investor asked sharply. "I'm suggesting that I refuse to move forward until I know these numbers are accurate," Naomi replied firmly. "My integrity matters more to me than closing this deal today." The room fell into stunned silence, and then, slowly, one investor began to clap. "In 20 years of business, I have never seen someone stop a multimillion-dollar presentation to protect the truth," he said, rising from his seat. "Ms. Mensah, that kind of honesty is exactly what makes me want to invest in this company." Within hours, the truth emerged completely. Security footage confirmed Richard had accessed Naomi's files without authorization, and he was terminated immediately, escorted out of the building in disgraced silence while his former colleagues watched. Evelyn found Naomi in her office later that evening, staring out the window with trembling hands. "You could have hidden it," Evelyn said softly, stepping inside. "You could have presented those numbers and blamed the error on someone else later." "I couldn't do that," Naomi replied. "Not after everything you taught me about integrity." "No," Evelyn said, smiling for the first time that entire week. "You already knew that before you ever met me." Months passed, and Naomi rose through Sterling Global Holdings faster than anyone anticipated, eventually becoming Director of Community Development, a position Evelyn created specifically for her. Naomi's first initiative launched a nationwide food assistance program for struggling seniors, ensuring no elderly person would ever again face humiliation over something as simple as a loaf of bread. At the launch ceremony, surrounded by cameras and reporters, Evelyn walked onto the stage carrying a single loaf of bread wrapped carefully in a golden ribbon. 2 years ago, a stranger paid for my groceries when I was humiliated in front of an entire store, Evelyn said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. That small act of kindness changed the trajectory of both our lives. People think this is simply bread. She turned, placing the loaf gently into Naomi's hands. I see the moment someone reminded me that genuine kindness still exists in this world. Naomi held the bread against her chest, tears streaming freely down her face as she looked out at the crowd. It was never about the bread, Naomi said softly into the microphone. It was about making sure no one loses their dignity, no matter how little they have. The crowd rose in thunderous applause, and somewhere in that audience, Naomi's father stood proudly, tears in his own eyes, watching his daughter stand tall in a life neither of them ever imagined possible. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the greatest investment in someone's future. If this story touched your heart even a little, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this one, and drop a comment letting me know which part moved you the most. Give this video a like before you go, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back to us.